Hello, I'm David Matthews, and again, I'm with Reverend Nancy Springer, and we're continuing on our Bible study, looking today at Isaiah chapter 34. Welcome, and we're very glad you're joining us today. Nancy.
Hi there. I'm going to just start us right in with reading the beginning of chapter 34. Draw near, you nations, to hear, and listen, you peoples. Hear, earth and all who fill it, world and all its offspring. The Lord rages against all the nations and is angry with all their armies. God is about to wipe them out and has prepared them for slaughter. Their dead will be cast out, the stench of their corpses will rise, and the mountains will melt from their blood. All the stars of heaven will dissolve, the skies will roll up like a scroll, and all the stars will fall, like a leaf withering from a vine, like fruit from a fig tree. When my sword has drunk its fill in the heavens, it will descend upon Edom for judgment, upon a people I have doomed for destruction. The Lord has a sword covered with blood. It is soaked with fat from the blood of lambs and goats, from the kidney fat of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Basra, a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Wild oxen will fall with them, steers with mighty bulls, and their land will be drenched with blood, its soil soaked with fat. The Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of payback for Zion's cause.
Edom's streams will be turned into pitch, its dust into sulfur, and its land will become burning pitch. Night and day won't be extinguished, its smoke will go up forever. From generation to generation it will lie waste. No one will ever pass through it again. Screech owls and crows will possess it. Owls and ravens will live there. God will stretch over it the measuring line of chaos and the plummet stone of emptiness over its officials. No kingdom there, they will call it, and all its princes will disappear. Thorns will grow up in its palaces, weeds and brambles in its fortresses. It will be a dwelling for jackals, a home for ostriches. Wild cats will meet hyenas. The goat demon will call to his friends, and there Lilith will lurk and find her resting place. There the snake will nest and lay eggs, and brood and hatch in its shadow. There 2 vultures will gather, each with its mate. Consult the Lord's scroll and read. Not one of these will be missing. None will lack its mate. God's own mouth has commanded. God's own spirit has gathered them. God has cast a lot for them. God's hand allotted it to them with the measuring line. They will possess it forever, and they will live in it from generation to generation. Okay, Nancy, well, that chapter was thoroughly delightful. What can we make from this? What can we hear in this?
Yeah, it is a rugged thing to read. And I think we just have to remember, right, that these words that Isaiah has put down on paper and have made their way to us many years later. Right, Isaiah is giving words to God's vision and message to Isaiah in the context of who Isaiah is, in the culture and language of the day. And so we have to remember that and not try to force it into our 21st century North American framework, but to look at it first and foremost from the time that it was put on paper, and to understand it culturally through the way they would see and describe what they say are acts of God among them, right? And how they describe that, and how Isaiah gives voice to God's message in these words. So
using that, sorry, so just connecting with that thought, what are some of then the cultural imagery or cultural stories then that we immediately hear as we enter into this reading?
I think there are visions throughout this chapter of both Moses and of Noah, right? So these are stories that would have been a part of who God's people are back then. as we look backwards, looking from our point of view back through the New Testament lens onto this, right? We can see words from Jesus that he has pulled from here, and part of the vision of the revelation to John. And so it is, there's a plethora of references that we can talk through.
Well, then why don't we start with right at the beginning then? And what reference do we, draw near, you nations, to hear, and listen, you peoples. Hear, earth and all who fill it, world and all of its offspring. The Lord rages against all the nations and is angry with all their armies. God is about to wipe them out and has prepared them for slaughter. What reference do you hear immediately right in the first couple of verses here then?
The message given to Noah that God is going to come and destroy the earth. And so it wasn't, again, even then, it was just wipe them all out and start over again. The interesting thing here is there's no saving of a certain set as he did with Noah, right? This is beyond that. God's beyond even saving a family. He's just going to wipe it all out. Right? What are you seeing in that bit, those verses?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be anything from that angle of salvation at this point. There just seems to be this declaration of God's wrath. Now, that could be about perspective, and we'll chat maybe a little bit about that, I think, near the end of this chapter. But at this point, you're absolutely right. There's this wrath that is now being poured out, and it's not just against the commentators here, or editors, I should say, of the Common English Bible, have titled this chapter "Vengeance Against Edom." But it's not just against Edom, it's against every nation.
Everybody,
this is everyone. And so we see that. And then it says in verse 3, their dead will be cast out. The stenches of their corpses will rise, and the mountains will melt from their blood. Like, even their dead, it's saying here, will be, at this point in time, seemingly judged or destroyed. Now, okay, we as Christians hear about the dead being judged, and we're like, yeah, I gotcha. Book of Revelation. Okay, I grant you, but that's not where we are in this story at this point. That hasn't been written. So this is a very apocalyptic literature style of this is the end. This is the judgment that is coming.
Yeah, I mean, they don't even have the vision of the dry bones coming back to life yet, right? That is still taking something that happened later and looking back through it. It is just, the end of the end.
Yeah, the hope there, and that's a different study altogether, but the hope cast in Ezekiel chapter 37 there with the dry bones is a beautiful story of life, even out of death, God bringing about new life. But here we're just getting how did you get that valley of dry bones? Death. You got it through destruction. And so in verse 4, all the stars of heaven will dissolve, the skies will roll up like a scroll, and the stars will fall, a leaf withering from a vine, like fruit from a fig tree. So here it's not even just earth being destroyed. We're getting the imagery and the understanding that heaven will be destroyed. The heavens will dissolve. The skies will roll up like a scroll. And again, when we get this idea of things being rolled up or unrolled by scrolls, it's this understanding of what we just read in previous chapters, this question of who is worthy to read this, or who is worthy to unroll this scroll. And of course, we as Christians were like, aha, Jesus language, I get it. No, but they didn't have that. They just recognized that this is language to state that we are not worthy, and that there's that separation between us and worthiness. And that's what it's trying to state here. So the other thing, though, we get to, it says the stars will fall, and this is again language, the stars representing, angels, heavenly bodies, powers, forces that are beyond us, but even they are going to be destroyed and judged. And then we get to these two lines, like leaf withering from a vine, like fruit from a fig tree. And these are obviously both signs of death, but we as Christians also know these words stand out to us as Christian symbols or things that Jesus used. So Nancy, what comes to your mind through the lens or language of Jesus when we hear about, the talk of the fig tree and the vine?
The vine. Well, Jesus saying, I am the vine and you are the branches, right? If we are cut off from the host, from our creator, right, we will wither and die. And that's exactly what has happened here is they have cut themselves off from doing God's will and fulfilling God's plan. And so they are withering and dying. And then there's the image of Jesus approaching the fig tree that failed to do what it was supposed to do. It had no figs. And so Jesus cursed it and it died instantly. And so there's that imagery of we are called to do God's will. We are called to follow Jesus and live in this world as Jesus chose us. And when we choose not to do that, when we cut ourselves off from those things, we are not fully alive. We are approaching death. So we would see all of this as imagery pointing toward the way of everlasting life with Jesus through our New Testament Christian lens. But the folks that were hearing these words did not have that lens, and it was just utter, complete destruction without hope, without redemption on the other side.
Mm-hmm. And we hear that more when we get to verse 5 here, where it says, my sword is drunk, its fill in the heavens, it will descend upon Edom for judgment, upon a people I have doomed for destruction. The Lord has a sword covered with blood, it's soaked with fat, from the blood of lambs and goats, from the kidney fat of rams. For the Lord has a sacrifice in Bozrah, a great slaughter in the land of Edom. And so here we see a transition from the judgment of all the heavens and the earth to now speaking specifically about how Edom will experience that judgment. And saying when God's destroyed all these things, Edom is not going to be spared. Edom is going to be destroyed too. And this sword that's covered with blood, soaked with fat from the blood of lambs, goats, kidney fat of rams. These are the things that were made for sacrifice for God as a way of attempting to make sacrifice. So the idea being, even though all these sacrifices have been made and done, no, this is still coming. This judgment is still coming. Those sacrifices haven't atoned for anything.
Right.
This judgment is still coming upon Edom.
Right. Because the sacrifice wasn't to give you the freedom to behave however you wanted. The sacrifice was to make up for the times that you sinned, right? And so they were trying to substitute the sacrifices and just do lots of them so that they could behave however they wanted, right? And still get away with it. And it's just the mixing up of the purpose, the undoing of the purpose of sacrifice so that it just becomes a slaughter.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no getting away with anything there. There is the reality that the atonement that was made, as you said, didn't allow you to then just go off and do whatever you wanted. You're supposed to, through this atonement, see the cost of sin, see the blood that needed to be shed. And although in this time, this animal's blood, this should lead you not into sin. This should lead you into a state of repentance. And these people aren't getting there.
Yeah.
And that's not a judgment from me. That's just a statement of fact.
What the text is saying.
Yeah. And so we get to verse 8. The Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of payback for Zion's cause. So stating that the sin of Edom, it sounds like, was actually their trespass or act against Zion, against Jerusalem, against the work what God was attempting to do. Because again, that's what Israel stood for. Israel was supposed to be the shining light that drew people to the worship of God. It wasn't, again, their righteousness, but it was about God's ability to shine through them with his message to the world. And so if you stamped on Jerusalem, if you stamped on Israel, it wasn't about you stamping on the people, although you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that to your next door neighbor. But the real offense to doing it specifically to them was you were then inhibiting the ability of God's message to go out. And that was the problem there.
Yeah.
So we see then, the direct punishment against Edom. Edom's streams will be turned into pitch, its dust into sulfur, its land will become burning pitch, right? So how does this work? Night and day won't be extinguished. Its smoke will go up forever. From generation to generation, it will lie waste. No one will ever pass through it again. Can you help me work out the imagery? What is being said?
Yeah. Well, for me, it brings to mind from the creation story, this God separating night and day, light and dark, and creating order where there was chaos. And that order is now taken away. And, in a fire, the flames are bright as day, and yet the smoke is dark as night. And so they're just mixed together again. There is no more of God's order of things, an order of creation, but just they're destroyed so completely that they're back to pre-creation and the chaos of even before God creating and ordering the world.
Yeah. And I love your use of, the term chaos, because it really does, we think at times of, anarchists standing up to the man, but anarchy is one thing in the way we describe it and use it, but true anarchy, true chaos is a truly horrifying reality.
Yeah.
Where there is no defense against anything or anyone. And that usually is sort of the second, if you will, the second horror of war is the weapons of war have now ceased and left, but now you have this great sense of chaos in the land, and there's no anything. So anyway, we get to that, like in verse 11 here, it says screech owls and crows will possess it. Owls and ravens will live there. And these are scavengers, right? Yeah. These are what come along to pick the dead, to find what they can. And then it says, God will stretch over it the measuring line of chaos and the plummet stone of emptiness over its officials. So God has established this chaos at this point, or reestablished chaos. And it's such a bizarre idea, isn't it? God is the God of order. And yet here we're seeing God implement or create chaos.
Yeah, he's created uncreation.
Yeah. That is a staggering thought. Wow.
Yeah.
And so no kingdom there, they will call it, and its princes will disappear. So there's nobody left to rule, nobody left to be in charge at all.
Yeah. And it has been God's measuring stick and plumb line, right, have become chaos and emptiness rather than order. So it's just utter despair as I read it.
Yeah, justice is lacking. Well, not lacking, absent. It's gone.
Mm-hmm. There's nothing. Yeah.
And then we see the results is that, it talks about thorns and weeds and all these things. And it's just showing the complete lack of dominion, the lack of anybody taking control over. And this is where we get back, I think, to as you had pointed earlier, to that pre-creation, or I shouldn't say the early creation language of the Garden of Eden. Because what do you do in a garden? You tend it, you weed it, you pull certain plants up and throw them away in order to get the plants you want there to grow and flourish. But here we see that, thorns, weeds, and brambles are growing in a fortress. And clearly these are the things that do not belong there, but are actually taking back over what was civilization. What was that man had created. Now the wilderness, the wildness is taking it back over. And it's not that a garden is taking it back over. It's not like Eden is making headway against man's kingdom that he's created. It's like, no, chaos has come against what man has created and is destroying it.
Yeah. The brambles and thorns, right, are not what we picture in tidy little garden rows, but overgrowing and destroying, right? They grow through the cracks and crevices and break it up even and destroy it even more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this earlier, but for anybody who's read the Chronicles of Narnia, the imagery that comes to mind is from the beginning of the story of Prince Caspian, where the brothers and sisters go back to Narnia, and here they land in this castle, and this castle is, or in this island, and they find this castle that's falling apart. And because of its destruction, they don't even recognize that this was once their castle where they lived. So, and that's just what's the imagery of what's happening here. Civilization won't even be recognizable. What man has made won't even be recognizable by those who made it. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are many people in history that if they were to look, 100 years forward to today, they might be looking at their beloved country or their beloved city going, what did you do?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just nothing. It won't be recognizable.
No.
So Nancy, can you help me understand here, verse 14? Wildcats will meet hyenas, the goat demon will call to his friends, and there Lilith will lurk and find her resting place.
Yeah. So, at the beginning of the chapter, we were talking about the animals used for sacrifice, right? They, to use a Texas term, right? They ranched these animals specifically for those purposes, right? It was ordered, and everything was done for meaning and purpose. And now we've got these animals that have no, right? You're not gonna have a herd of jackals that you raise intentionally or farm for ostriches or hyenas, right? These are animals associated with death and destruction. And so they're the ones that are populating the earth. And to denigrate it even more, right? Goat demons will call all their friends and have them come in. Lilith is a traditional name for a female demon that fell from heaven early on in creation, and just as bad as they come. And so, right, she will come and lurk and find her resting place among the jackals and the ostriches and the goat demons. And we go in, I'm going to keep it going through verse 15 of the snake, right? And so, the snake is the one animal mentioned in the curse, and who is cursed, following Adam and Eve, disobeying God and eating from the tree that they weren't supposed to, right? And so as God casts them out, the snake is part of the curse of creation, the brokenness of creation. And now, right, that creature, the lowest and craftiest of creatures, as is described in Genesis, right, is now part of the crew that is having dominion over the earth at this point in time. So, yeah, again, it is just completely undoing everything.
So it sounds like it's not just that creation and order are going to be removed, but actually this is almost like a breeding ground, or it's been turned into a breeding ground for all of the things that are bad. And actually further destruction and death are going to be in this place and grow here, or reside here, I should say.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So when we get to verse 16, I note that there's a change of gears. There seems to be something different here. And we talked about this previously. There's verse 16 and 17. There doesn't seem to be consensus on what to do with these verses. So what's one idea that you've heard that these verses are referring to, or what do they mean?
Well, I think what we see in them, right, is again a parallel back to Noah and God giving Noah orders to gather all the animals in pairs so that life can go on. And the story of Noah is about continuing life in the midst of God's judgment. But some of the commentaries I read think that there's there's something missing. A piece of text has been lost in between verse 15 and 16, so that we don't know exactly what 16 and 17, what the pronouns in there are referring back to, because it's difficult to have them refer back to the immediate verses and these animals of death, unless, again, it's just furthering that image of everything completely undone, that instead of the ark being this vision of continued life, that again, we are just in utter destruction here. And so there is no image of continued life, but only of death.
Yeah, and we're left here in verses 16 and 17. Consult the Lord's scroll and read. Not one of these will be missing. None will lack its mate. God's own mouth has commanded. God's own spirit has gathered them. God has cast the lot for them. God's hand allotted it to them with the measuring line. They will possess it forever. They will live in it from generation to generation. That doesn't, you're right, that doesn't seem to coincide easily with the previous them. Is it referring to the thorns and thistles, the wildcats, the hyenas, the demons? Who's the them referring to? Yeah. Is it referring to Edom itself? So, not one of these will be missing. These curses, none will lack its mate. So the curses will all come surely. And God's own spirit has gathered them. So just as once God brought about salvation for Noah and humanity through Noah, God is going to assuredly bring about destruction and the curse upon Edom and the ultimate, if you will, destruction of the heavens and the earth. And as Christians, we could say, okay, we get that in a revelation type of chronology or timeline. And so if he's having a vision of what we would say is the end of the world, okay, great. But often when we read the book of Isaiah, we have the tendency to believe that these or picture these curses falling upon these nations or people as things that are going to happen before Jesus comes. So it's almost, we sort of want to treat the Old Testament like the Old Testament is tied up with a neat bow by the time Jesus comes. So when Jesus comes, Jesus has fulfilled all of that, and now it's nice history to read, but it doesn't have anything to do with what's going to be coming, surely. And so we've run into that bit of the problem of what do we do with this text? So,
but it is very much, it does backwards reflect, right? Looking backwards through time, exactly what is described in Revelation of the new heaven and the new earth, right? Because everything will be made new. We just don't get the be made new part yet here in Isaiah. We got to wipe out the old first, because you can't build new until you've taken down the old.
So not jumping too far ahead of us, but is just chapter 35 say, well, we're done with that. Now we get to the good stuff? Like,
sort of. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what I want to tell everybody is don't let all this depress you. Come back for chapter 35's discussion, because I promise it gets better.
Okay, well, you know what? Why don't we end there then? And we'll jump back on with chapter 35 next time. Okay?
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Dave.
Well, God bless you all, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.